In the shadow of the Erdtree, we are introduced to several new enemies. The terrifying fire golems, the macabre Agent Untouchable, the powerful horn-scent warriors. But among so many new threats, we find a disturbing, diseased, filthy man-fly, tormented by the so-called Flysickness. This affliction is spoken of with dread by those who inhabit these lands, the dreadful Flysickness that has claimed many lives and twisted its victims into monstrosities. In this video, I continue my journey through the connections between human history and the world of Elden Ring, piecing together theories about the man-fly's lore. Because, I don't know about you, but I love to talk about the disturbing side of Elden Ring. So, let's try to understand these poor souls. When it comes to disease in Elden Ring, I already covered scarlet rot in 2 previous videos. But today I want to talk about something far less poetically beautiful than scarlet rot, the Flysickness. Our first encounter with the man-flies in the DLC is in the abandoned alien village. At first, they seem like just another enemy there to annoy the player. They can latch onto our head and appear to suck our blood. The man-flies are hybrids between humans and flies, as their name suggests. They are grotesque beings, large, bloated flies with disturbingly human-like arms. One of their attacks is particularly revolting. They vomit worms and filth towards their enemies. In short, nothing about them is remotely acceptable. These vile creatures are scattered across the Land of Shadow, usually in damp, dark places. We also find them in areas connected to the Horn-Scents, Belurat and Anir Elim. According to the man-fly Ash's description, these monsters were once horn-scent humans afflicted by a dreadful sickness. Afflicted horn-scent eventually metamorphosed into a fly-like form. It was believed that the moment the transformation took place, they were relieved from their suffering. This suggests that the metamorphosis was not only physical, but also mental, as the horn-scents who become man-flies lose most traces of human behavior. Curiously, we find some of these creatures kneeling in prayer in front of statues of tutelary deities, implying they still recognize religious symbols from their former culture. The item description also makes something very clear. The suffering is immense. Only after the full transformation do they find peace. Until then, their existence is pure torment. Yet one curious detail stands out. Those who carry out for the sick were never afflicted by the diseased. The ailment talisman reads, "When the weak were infected with the dreaded Flysickness, they perished well before the metamorphosis could take hold. Oddly, those who cared for the infected and made certain they were given a proper burial were never afflicted themselves." This suggests that Flysickness might not be a traditional disease at all, but something stranger, perhaps a curse or a condition triggered by specific causes. When we arrive at Belurat, the grand tower of the Horn-Scents, a place of worship and study, the Tarnished find many man-flies lurking. Beyond the ones still alive, we also see large, hollowed-out carcasses, as if giant creatures had to give birth to smaller ones. Or perhaps the disease erupted from within their bodies, unleashing new victims into the world. The player quickly grows accustomed to seeing decomposing organic matter and filth wherever these creatures dwell. While we can't smell what is in the game, it's easy to imagine that everything surrounding the man-flies is putrid, fetid, and rotten. Continuing on the theme of filth and disgust, many of these enemies drop fly mold, described as a species of fungus known for its deadly sweet stench, found by hunting man-flies. Cultivated using the flesh and blood of man-flies, it can serve as pot innards. This material is used to craft various kinds of pots, including some that inflict scarlet rot and hemorrhage. Some fans have speculated that the origin of Flysickness might be tied to the outer gods, like those behind scarlet rot or the Formless Mother. But I have another theory. The recurring connection between rot, flies, and sickness, in my opinion, isn't divine, it's biological. After all, flies have always been associated with rot and death, born from maggots, the very same ones the man-flies vomit onto their victims. Anyway, as with much of Elden Ring, we left together scattered clues, and those fragments let us form countless theories. Unlike other afflictions in the lands between, like madness or scarlet rot, both clearly linked to outer gods, Flysickness seems to lack an outer god origin. So where did it come from? Here's the theory I find most compelling. I like to imagine that the Hornsens, in their pursuit of understanding the Crucible and the forces of nature interacting with living beings, ended up performing an experiment that went horribly wrong. This wouldn't be surprising given that animalistic traits in humans were not only common in Hornsen culture, but considered a blessing. The Crucible embraces mixture and mutation. It's said that in the Crucible, all life was blended together, giving rise to creatures with mixed features, wings, horns, scales. With this belief in mind, it's easy to imagine the Inquisitor seeing forced metamorphosis as a sacred path, a kind of exalted test of faith. And just like Dr. Moreau from H.G. Wells' 1896 novel, The Scientist Who Plays God by Creating Grotesque Hybrids of Humans and Animals in His Unethical Experiments, the man-flies might be the Hornsen equivalent, failed hybrids born from a misguided attempt to touch the divine. But something went terribly wrong. The poor victims were infected with a disease that slowly turned them into grotesque flies, sick, rotting, and in pain. This would also explain why not all Hornsens were infected, not even those who cared for the man-flies. If the mutation was intentional, the result of a failed experiment, a designed disease meant to affect only certain subjects, it wouldn't need to be contagious. It also explains why we find some of them scattered through and near Elin. Perhaps, before the tower was severed from Rao, there was a space for these beings, a secret place where the experiments were conducted. We also see a ghost in the alien village that says, "Am I human still? Is that the reason I yet suffer so?" Which we can deduce that they expected these transformations, the end of the human form. In that sense, it's as if Hornsen society did entirely reject those who survived the fly sickness. Maybe some believed that the man-flies still had a role to play, that they were the blessed ones, having endured the Crucible's sacred trial. Which is fitting, considering that, as I mentioned in my previous video, the word Crucible can also mean a severe test or ordeal, the kind of trial that forges a person or transforms them completely. That idea only makes sense if the plague was framed as a religious test from the beginning. And then, something even more macabre happened. With the war against Mesmer, the Hornsens likely lost control of the fly sickness. The disease spread across the land of shadow, and Bellerat itself became infested. Many man-flies now gather around piles of corpses, or linger in the flooded, poisoned lower levels of Bellerat, an area visibly corrupted by the plague. After all, we know how quickly flies reproduce. This mutation may have slipped beyond the Hornsen's control, just as they were being overwhelmed by a much more urgent threat, Mesmer himself. There are other possible theories, of course, but to me, this is the most compelling, because it suggests these creatures once had a purpose. And beyond the lore, my real interest is connecting Elden Ring to real-world history. Could the origins of Flysickness reflect events from real-world history? Could the Hornsen Inquisitors be compared to real scientists who pushed past the boundaries of ethics in search of answers? That's what we explore in the next chapter. Before continuing, a quick note. The purpose of my videos is not only to explore the lore of Elden Ring, but also to open up discussion with literature and history, two of my biggest passions. I'm not claiming that the game developers had these historical parallels in mind when creating the story, but I do believe it's possible and valuable to draw connections between the game's world and the real-world cultures and societies that have shaped us. When the parallels fit, they are worth exploring. This part of the video includes sensitive and disturbing historical content, presented strictly for educational purpose. The goal is to show how, throughout history, real societies have crossed ethical boundaries in the name of science, faith, or ideology, a theme that resonates with the man-flies and their green transformation in Elden Ring. The cases below have been universally condemned, and they help to shape the ethical principles that guide modern science today. Most well-known examples of lab-created diseases and unethical human experimentation took place during World War II. It was a time when science and technology advanced at an unprecedented pace, but that same science was also weaponized by different societies for different and macabre purposes. Under the regime, doctors and scientists carry out experiments on prisoners in detention camps. These ranged from supposed military or medical research to pseudo-scientific racial studies. The experiments were carried out through forced exposure to extreme conditions, deliberate infection, and toxic interventions. Victims were forcibly exposed to infectious diseases like malaria, typhus, tuberculosis, and cholera without consent, often resulting in death. After the war, the world learned of these atrocities, and international tribunals led to the conviction of those responsible. In 1947, the Nuremberg Code was created, establishing informed and voluntary consent as a fundamental requirement for any human experimentation. Later, in 1964, the Declaration of Helsinki formalized a set of ethical principles that are now considered essential in medical research. During the same period, the Imperial Japanese Army operated a secret research facility called Unit 731, located in occupied Manchuria. This military division was responsible for the development of biological and chemical weapons. Its purpose was to engineer deadly pathogens and study their effects on human body. The unit conducted some of the most disturbing experiments in the modern history, injected prisoners with diseases like plague, typhus, and smallpox without anesthesia or consent. Thousands of people died within these facilities. The full extent of these crimes only came to light decades later, and they have since been met with widespread international condemnation. In the segregated southern United States, the Public Health Service conducted decades-long study in which hundreds of African American men with syphilis were observed, but never treated, even after penicillin became widely available. These men were misled, never told their real diagnosis, and never given the cure. As a result, many suffered severe complications, including blindness, paralysis, and even death, and some passed the disease to their families. The scandal broke in the 70s, sparking outrage and prompting major reform. It led to the National Research Act and the Belmont Report, which laid the groundwork for today's ethical standards in research: informed consent, respect for persons, and institutional oversight. During World War II, malaria was a major threat to Allied troops. To fight it, U.S. researchers partnered with the military to test new drugs on prison inmates at Stateville Penitentiary in Illinois. Over 400 prisoners volunteered, often in exchange for reduced sentences or simply to serve the war effort. They were deliberately infected with malaria through mosquito bites and treated with various experimental medications. Although the study was closely monitored and technically involved consent, critics later questioned whether true consent was possible in a prison environment. It stands as a complicated case, sitting right on the boundary between necessary wartime research and exploitation of the vulnerable. It also fueled later discussions around ethics in research involving institutionalized groups. Each of these real-world cases helped shape modern bioethics and public policy. And despite their differences, they share a disturbing common thread: the belief that some lives could be used as tools, as disposable pieces in the pursuit of a greater goal. That belief aligns uncomfortably well with the fictional history of the Hornsens, society that embraced forced metamorphosis, perhaps even in pursuit of holiness or communion with nature's raw power, regardless of the suffering it caused. In Elden Ring, Flysickness might at first seem like just another grotesque affliction in a world already soaked in madness, rot, and death. But if we look closer, past the maggots, the filth, and the monstrous flesh, it starts to look chillingly familiar. Not divine, but human. If we believe the theory that the Hornsens deliberately induced this metamorphosis, not just as a scientific experiment, but as a spiritual calling, an attempt to access the chaotic forces of the crucible, then the man-flies are victims, but also sacrifice gone wrong, left to rot in the dark. And just like in real history, this story reflects the countless times where science and ideology were pursued without empathy or restraint, and where the price was paid in human lives. So next time you see a man-fly kneeling in prayer before a crumbling statue, remember, he might have once been a believer, or a subject, or just someone who hoped to become something greater and pay the price. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe for more video game lore content. Thanks for watching. Till next time, bye!